Last winter, Clara Wainwright's little girl nearly froze to death inside their cabin. Not outside, not lost in the snow, inside. The fire was burning, the blankets were piled high, and still the cold found her. It came up through the floorboards, it slipped through the walls. It settled into her chest until her breathing turned shallow and wet. Clara sat beside her through those nights, counting each breath in the dark, waiting, listening, not for silence, but for the moment the breathing might stop. The girl survived, barely. But something else did not. Clara's belief that the cabin could protect them. The cabin had been built the way everyone built them. Stacked pine logs, mud and moss packed into the seams, a stone hearth, a single room with a low loft above. By every standard in the territory, it should have been enough. But winter does not care about standards. When the wind came down from the north, it did not simply blow. It hunted. It pressed against the walls. It searched for weakness. It found every seam, every crack, every careless place where warmth tried to hide. And then it took it. Each time Clara opened the door, the cold entered like it belonged there. Each time she crossed the room, she could feel it rising from the ground beneath her feet. By February, the frost had crept across the inside of the walls. The window glass turned white at the edges, and her daughter slept in a coat beside the fire. That was the winter her husband Jonah died. Not in a storm, not in the open, but slowly, as the cold took more from him than the fire could give back. By spring, Clara Wainwright was alone with 2 children and a cabin she no longer trusted. Most people would have tried to improve the house. More wood, thicker chinking, stronger fire. That was what everyone believed survival required. Clara began watching something else. The barn. It was smaller, rougher, less carefully built than the cabin, and yet, on cold evenings, it felt different. Not warm, but not sharp, not biting. The air inside the barn did not move the same way. The wind did not reach it. The north wall was banked with earth. Hay stacked in the loft held the air close, and the animals, 2 horses and a milk cow, gave off a quiet, steady warmth without knowing it. Clara began to notice something she could not ignore. On nights when her cabin froze, she could stand inside that barn without gloves. That was the moment the idea took hold. Not fully formed, not certain, but persistent. What if the problem was not the fire? What if the problem was where they were sleeping? She stood there one evening longer than usual, listening to the slow movement of hooves in straw, the soft sound of breath in the dark, feeling the difference in the air. And she asked herself a question no one else in the valley had thought to ask. What if we slept beneath it? not in the barn, not in the open, but below it, beneath the animals, beneath the hay, beneath the wind. Using the earth as walls, using the barn as a shield, using everything above them to hold the warmth in place. It was not a comfortable idea. It was not a proper one. And it was certainly not something anyone would recommend. It was something a woman thinks of after watching her child nearly die in the cold. Clara did not discuss it. She did not ask for advice. She did not explain herself to anyone. She picked up a shovel and began digging beneath the barn. Clara began digging in early October. Not in the open, not where anyone could see. Inside the barn. Each morning, after feeding the horses and carrying hay down from the loft, she would close the wide door behind her, lift a section of floorboards, and climb down into the earth with a shovel. At first, it was just a shallow cut, a mark, a place where the ground had been disturbed. But by the third day, the shape had begun to take form. She dug carefully, not wide at first, not deep too quickly, because the earth in that part of Montana did not forgive mistakes. Too steep, and the walls could collapse. Too loose, and water would seep in when the snow melted. So she worked slowly, deliberately, the way people work when they understand that failure has consequences. Bucket by bucket, she hauled the soil out. Petro helped where he could, dragging the smaller loads across the barn floor. The dirt did not pile in one place. She spread it thin across the yard, filled low spots, smoothed it out, so no one passing by would notice how much earth had been removed. By the end of the first week, the pit was deep enough that the light above began to fade by afternoon. The sounds of the barn changed. Hooves became distant, muted. The wind outside disappeared entirely. That was the first sign she was right. The deeper she dug, the quieter it became. By the third week, the chamber had taken its full shape, 8 feet wide, 12 feet long, 7 feet deep. Not large, but enough. Enough for 3 people to sleep without touching the walls. Enough to hold warmth without losing it too quickly. Then came the part that mattered more than the digging, the structure. Clara gathered stone from the creek bed, flat pieces of sandstone and limestone, heavy, cold, reliable. She stacked them along the walls, not with mortar, but with care. Each piece leaned slightly inward, pressed by gravity, held in place by the weight of the earth behind it. Behind the stone, she packed firm soil, tight, solid, so moisture would not creep through when the ground froze and thawed. The floor she tamped hard, then sloped it gently toward one corner. There she filled a shallow pit with gravel, a place for water to collect instead of spreading. Above her head she built the ceiling, old beams salvaged from a collapsed shed, thick, weathered, still strong. She set them across the span of the chamber, close enough to carry weight, then layered boards across the top. Above that stood the barn. 2 horses, 1 cow, and nearly 8 feet of hay stacked in the loft. The weight pressed down, but it also insulated, held the air still, trapped the warmth that rose from below. The entrance was the simplest part, and the most important. A square cut in the barn floor, no larger than 3 feet across. From above, it looked like nothing, just boards, worn, ordinary. Below it, a short ladder led into the chamber. No outside door, no exposed opening, no way for the wind to find its way inside. That was the point. No wind, no drafts, no sudden loss of heat every time someone entered or left. Ventilation came next. Clara shaped a narrow clay pipe from drainage tiles she had traded for months earlier. It rose from the chamber ceiling, angled carefully, and exited through the barn wall. From outside, it looked like nothing more than a simple vent, but it allowed air to move, allowed smoke to escape, allowed the space to breathe without letting the wind take control. In one corner, she built a small hearth, not large, not meant for constant fire, just enough to warm the stone, enough to charge the walls with heat that would stay long after the flame died, because that was the secret she was building toward. Not heat, retention. By mid-November, the room was finished. Clara lowered the bedding first. A rope bed, a straw mattress, 2 smaller pallets for the children, blankets folded with care, an oil lamp placed on a small wooden table. It did not look like a proper room. It looked like a cave. Stone, earth, low ceiling, no windows. But when she lit a small fire in the hearth, something happened. The warmth did not rush upward. It did not vanish into air. It stayed. The stone held it. The earth held it. The air inside the chamber barely moved. Clara watched the thermometer her husband had once brought from the east. The red line climbed slowly, then stopped. 55 degrees. Outside, the first frost of winter had already begun to settle across the valley. Inside, the air felt steady. For the first time since her husband died, Clara believed they might survive the winter. The children thought it was an adventure, sleeping beneath the barn, listening to the soft shift of hooves overhead, the quiet rustle of hay, the distant sound of wind they could no longer feel. Clara did not call it an adventure. She called it necessary. And above them, the valley had just begun to notice something was different. At first, people did not laugh. They watched, quietly, from a distance. It began with small things. A man riding past, slowing his horse. A woman at church pausing a moment too long before speaking. A glance toward the barn, then away again. Word moved the way it always did on the frontier, not loud, not direct, but steady. She's sleeping under the barn, not in it, under it, with the children. The word they chose was not cruel, not at first. It was peculiar. Peculiar was safer than saying what they were really thinking. That something in Clara Wainwright had shifted. That grief had changed her. That she no longer trusted the same things everyone else trusted. At the general store, a clerk mentioned damp air, underground sickness, rot. Another man spoke of flooding, of walls collapsing in the spring thaw. An older homesteader shook his head slowly. "You don't sleep under animals," he said. "Not if you want to stay well." No one confronted Clara directly, not with harsh words, but the concern began to take shape. And concern on the frontier could turn into judgment without warning. One afternoon, Gideon Marsh rode out to see for himself. He was not a cruel man, just a practical one, the kind who believed problems had proper solutions. He stood inside the barn for a long moment, looking down at the boards, listening. Then he heard it, a faint sound. Children's voices, muted, rising from beneath the floor. He looked up sharply, then back down again, as if the ground itself had spoken. Clara lifted the trapdoor without hesitation. She did not hide it. She did not apologize for it. "Would you like to see?" she asked. Gideon hesitated, then nodded. He climbed down the ladder slowly, one step at a time, expecting dampness, cold, the smell of earth and rot. Instead, he found still air, cool but not biting, dry, stable. Clara stood beside the small hearth. Her children sat near the bed, watching him with quiet curiosity. No coats, no visible breath. He said nothing at first, just took in the space, the stone walls, the low ceiling, the way the air seemed to rest instead of move. "It holds the heat," Clara said simply. Gideon nodded slowly, but he did not agree. Not fully. Not yet. Because what works in November does not always survive January. He climbed back up into the barn, pulled his coat tighter around himself, and looked once more at the quiet square in the floor. "It may be enough," he said carefully, "for now." That was how people spoke when they did not want to say the rest. When winter truly comes, we will see. Clara did not answer. She did not argue. She had already lived through one winter that nearly took everything from her. She did not need another opinion. By early December, the air began to change. The mornings grew sharper. Frost lingered long after sunrise. The wind no longer came in bursts. It stayed day and night. People checked their woodpiles, counted what they had, counted what they might lose. Smoke rose from chimneys earlier in the day, stayed longer into the night. The valley was preparing, the way it always did. Cabins sealed, doors reinforced, extra blankets brought down from storage. And beneath the barn, Clara Wainwright made no changes at all, because she was not preparing to fight the winter. She had already chosen where she would live when it came. The blizzard did not arrive like a single udar. It came slowly, tightening, closing. On the first day, the wind rose until it no longer stopped, not in gusts, not in bursts, but constant, a long, unbroken force pressing across the valley. Snow did not fall. It moved sideways, cutting across fields, climbing fences, erasing the distance between one homestead and the next. By nightfall, the temperature dropped below zero. By midnight, it fell far beyond that. Inside their cabins, families began the same fight, the only fight they knew. Feed the fire, again and again and again. Samuel Marsh and his wife took turns through the night, one sleeping, one waking to add wood before the heat could fall too far. Their children lay wrapped in blankets beside the hearth, still shivering, still breathing out small clouds into the dark air. Even with the fire burning strong, the room never felt warm, only less cold. There is a difference. By the second day, the woodpile began to shrink faster than it should. Samuel stood outside in the storm, staring at what remained, counting, estimating, feeling something settle in his chest. If this storm held, the wood would not. At the Hines place, the fire roared so hard the chimney began to glow. Still, the corners of the cabin stayed frozen. The old man coughed through the night, deep, wet, the kind of cough that does not leave when the storm does. In another part of the valley, Abigail Moore tried to clear her chimney when smoke began to back up into the room. She opened the door. The wind hit it like a living thing, tore it from her hands. Snow rushed inside in a white wave. She slammed it shut and let the fire die, because breathing mattered more than warmth. Across the valley, the story repeated. Different homes, same result. Wood disappearing, children coughing, frost creeping across the inside of walls, the cold winning slowly. But beneath Clara Wainwright's barn, something else was happening. Nothing. No frantic chopping, no constant feeding of fire, no smoke pouring into the sky. The barn above stood quiet, half buried in snow. The animals shifted in their stalls, unbothered. And below, the air did not move. The children slept, not wrapped tight in blankets, not waking in the night, sleeping. Clara sat beside the small hearth, not feeding it, not watching it, because it did not need watching. The fire had burned earlier. That was enough. The stone had taken the heat, and the stone remembered. The earth around them held steady. 18 inches of soil on every side, unaffected by the violence above, unaffected by the wind. Above their heads, the weight of hay pressed down, trapping the air, holding it still. The animals added warmth without effort, a slow, constant presence. Everything worked together, without noise, without urgency. On the third day of the storm, when the wind eased just enough to see beyond a few yards, Gideon Marsh stepped outside his cabin. He looked across the valley, squinting against the white glare, counting the shapes of buildings he could still recognize. Then his eyes found Clara's barn. No smoke. His stomach tightened. No one survived a storm like this without constant fire. No one. By the fourth day, when the wind weakened just enough to move, he made the decision. He would go, check on her, because whatever she had built beneath that barn should not have been enough. Gideon Marsh reached the barn just before dusk. The storm had weakened, but not ended. The wind still moved across the valley with force. The cold still cut through every layer of clothing. The walk that should have taken 20 minutes had taken nearly an hour. By the time he reached the door, his hands were stiff. His face burned with cold. His breath came short and shallow. He forced the barn door open. Snow had drifted against it, pressed it tight, but it gave. Inside, the air changed. Not warm, but not punishing, not sharp. The horses stood steady in their stalls. The cow turned its head slowly. Hay had been pulled down from the loft, fresh, ordered. Someone had been working. Someone had been living. Then he heard it. A voice, soft, from below. "Mama, is someone upstairs?" Gideon froze, looked down. Really looked this time. The outline in the boards, a square, clean, intentional. "Mrs. Wainwright?" he called. "It's Gideon." A moment passed, then movement, wood shifting, a ladder being pulled into place. The trap door lifted, and Clara's face appeared. Calm, color in her cheeks, eyes steady. "We're managing," she said. The words did not fit what he knew of the storm. They did not fit what he had just walked through. He nodded once, then stepped forward. "I'd like to see," he said. She did not hesitate. He climbed down slowly, one step at a time, expecting dampness, expecting cold, expecting the smell of earth. Instead, the change came halfway down the ladder. The cold loosened, not vanished, but released its grip. By the time his boots touched the ground, His hands no longer ached. His breath no longer burned. The air inside the chamber was warm, not hot, not heavy, steady, even. The kind of warmth that does not need defending. The children slept on their pallets, peacefully. No coats, no layers of blankets, no visible breath in the air. Gideon stood there without speaking, trying to understand what he was seeing. A small hearth sat in the corner, dark, no active fire, only the faint warmth of stone that had already done its work. He turned slowly, his eyes finding the thermometer on the wall. He stepped closer, squinted, read it once, then again. 54 degrees. Outside, it was near 40 below, a difference of nearly 100 degrees. Gideon let out a slow breath, not from the cold this time, from realization. "You haven't been feeding a fire all night," he said quietly. Clara shook her head. "Only in the evening. The stone holds it. The earth holds it." He looked at the walls, at the ceiling, at the solid weight of everything above them. The barn, the hay, the animals, the earth, all working together, without effort, without waste. "How much wood?" he asked. Clara answered simply, "1/8 of a cord since the storm began." Gideon closed his eyes for a moment, just a moment. His family had burned nearly 2 cords, and still they had shivered. When he climbed back up into the barn, the cold hit him again, sharp, immediate, unforgiving. He stood there for a long moment, looking down at the trap door. Not strange, not desperate. Practical. That was the word that finally settled. He returned home before nightfall, told his wife everything. The warmth, the number, the children sleeping without coats. She listened in silence, then whispered what they were both thinking. "We were wrong about her." By morning, the story had begun to spread, not with laughter this time, but with questions. Men came to see it, one by one. They stood in the barn, looked down at the trap door, climbed the ladder, and felt it for themselves. The warmth that did not run, the air that did not move, the quiet. By spring, when the ground softened, shovels broke earth across the valley. Not for graves, not for storage, for survival. Some rooms flooded, some failed at first. But people learned, adjusted, shared what worked. The next winter came, and it was still cold, still hard, still unforgiving. But fewer children coughed through the night. Fewer families burned through their wood before February. More people slept. Years later, when someone asked Gideon Marsh about that winter, he answered simply, She wasn't strange. She was paying attention. Because the truth was never complicated. The earth does not lose heat to the wind. And sometimes the safest place to live through winter is not above it, but beneath it.